Hello and welcome to Armenian news network Groong, Week in Review. Before we begin, I'd appreciate your help in reaching a wider audience, so please don't forget to subscribe and like us on whatever platform you're using to listen to us, and help spread the word by sharing this podcast on your social media channels. Thanks in advance. In this episode, we'll have our resident panelists addressing a number of topics that have been popular in the headlines in the past week. We'll begin with Armenian POW Gurgen Alaverdyan, covering the details around his capture as well as the fate of other POWs and civilian captives currently in Baku. We'll discuss Armenia's humanitarian aid to Aleppo within the wider context of Armenia's foreign policy. Serge Sargsyan's press conference on the events surrounding the April 2016 war made a lot of headlines this week. We'll try to filter out the PR spin and understand the objective facts surrounding this topic. We'll also take a look at Armenia's and Artsakh's policy around handing out national awards. And lastly, Vagharshak Harutyunyan was appointed as chief advisor to Nikol Pashinyan. Who is he, and what is the significance of this appointment? Stay tuned to get our take on these issues and more. Welcome to our Week in Review, everyone. We're joined today by our resident panelists, 𝐀𝐬𝐿 Emil Sanamyan and Alan Zamanyan. 𝐀𝐬𝐿 is a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts. Emil Sanamyan is a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. Alan Zamanyan is a software engineer in LA who follows and has analyzed Armenian affairs for over a decade. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Last week, Army officer Gurgen Alaverdyan was captured near the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. Armenia claims that Alaverdyan got lost in very bad weather, while Azerbaijan claims that they thwarted a commander raid into the territory. This incident happened during Shoigu's visit to Baku. Emil Sanamyan, what have you heard about this developing story?
Hi, everybody. What I've heard is that we know that it was a very bad weather day in that high elevation area in Mrav Mountains. It was actually snowing in August there, and it's regular occurrence. And what we also know is that this particular officer, Senior Lieutenant Alaverdyan, was only recently moved to that unit in that area, in another area. That's kind of a combination of factors. Now we don't know exactly whether he walked into an Azerbaijani post thinking he was walking into an Armenian post. It seems like the most likely scenario, but it's also possible that Azerbaijanis were sort of using the weather to try to capture somebody, because for a while they've been trying to find a good candidate to exchange for the two Azerbaijani men who were sentenced to long life sentence and the 22-year sentence for the murder and the kidnapping in that area. This was back in 2014. They're still doing time in prison in Shushi. Previously, efforts to capture candidates for an exchange have not been very successful, because on the one hand, the Armenian side does not treat those two Azerbaijani men as prisoners of war, considers them criminal because they were not in uniform, and has refused to exchange them. On the Azerbaijani side, the people that they have captured were either sort of accidental people walking across the border, people with limited mental faculties, a couple of soldiers who either defected or also sort of walked over in a circumstance that were not very clear. In this case, they kind of got a candidate that they feel that they would be able to exchange. And on the Armenian side, I've heard serious talk considering exchanging at least one of the men being held who is not directly implicated in the murder, the one who's on 20-some year sentence, and he's already done 6 years of that sentence. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully some kind of an exchange can be arranged.
Emil, on that issue of an officer walking and getting lost in these areas, is this an easy thing to do, to get lost? Are the areas well delineated, or is it difficult to understand where you're going to once you walk out of your outpost?
Well, it's not that easy. I mean, basically, we're talking about really bad kind of luck, and I think it's hard to imagine that somebody would walk out of the post in that area unarmed, and it looks like he was unarmed. At least the weapons that they showed associated with with Alaverdyan were not his. It's pretty clear, and also without any kind of working communication device, so he would be able to contact the other people there. So it's a mountainous area. That particular area, there are not that many cases of ceasefire violations, just because posts are pretty far distant from one another, on different mountaintops. originally it seemed unlikely to me that he would be able to actually walk for that long in the wrong direction, But considering that he was newly posted there and may not have been very familiar with the area, I wouldn't rule. I think that's a pretty likely possibility at this point. Last time something like this happened in that particular area with soldiers sort of getting lost and showing up at the wrong post actually happened with the Azerbaijani soldiers. This was back in 1990, I want to say 6 or 7, when a whole bunch of Azerbaijani soldiers just walked up to the Armenian post, one officer and like 4 or 5 soldiers, and the soldiers were returned. The officer was imprisoned, taken to Shushi, and in response, the Azerbaijani side tried to take prisoners to exchange with that officer. They weren't able to find military prisoners, so they went across the border into Armenia, actually, into Vartanis area. I think it's Metsmazrat village there. And after many miles walking, this Azerbaijani reconnaissance group managed to imprison 2 farmers and one of their children and brought them with them to Azerbaijan. And then exchange them for that officer, also as junior officer. So it's an uncommon event, but it's not without precedent.
Emil, is it common for these soldiers to be alone when they're at the post? Or, I'm just amazed that there was no one else. At least we're not hearing about whether he had any other soldiers with him.
Some kind of protocol was violated. I mean, this sort of thing should not happen like this. There should be more than one. But I mean, I can't imagine. The official version is that he went to check on the posts, and as an officer, he would probably 2 or 3 posts that he would be overseeing, and he just walked off on the wrong road. So especially for a new guy to go by himself, probably some degree of overconfidence there.
In recent weeks, Syria in general and Aleppo in specific witnessed a steep rise in COVID-19 cases while dealing with severe shortages of medical supplies. The Armenian community left in the city has also been hit by the pandemic. Armenia delivered 2 tons of medical supplies for Aleppo hospitals after it provided 12 tons of medical and food supplies to the survivors of the Beirut explosion. Asbet Kochigyan, how can we evaluate Armenia's new humanitarian foreign policy?
It's a pickle, sort of. If you look at Armenia's foreign policy in the context of providing humanitarian aid, especially in the Middle East, where there are a lot of large Armenian communities, I think there is an element of genuine concern about the welfare of our Armenians living in those countries. At the same time, situating it in the larger context of state-to-state aid. What we witnessed the last couple of weeks when Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh also sent aid to Lebanon, they specifically mentioned that it was aid that is being provided to the government for distribution of everyone, not just for our community. In Aleppo and in Syria in recent weeks, we have seen, as you mentioned, a steep rise of COVID-19 cases, mostly because of the lack of medicine, as well as the embargo and inaccessibility of medicine and food even, and also because of the fact that basically under the conditions of war, not a lot of people have been paying attention to the slowly creeping virus. So the 2 tons that was announced that they're going to provide is for hospitals in Aleppo. Also considering that a lot of the COVID-19 cases were doctors and medical personnel within the Armenian community and without. Many cases have been announced. And there is a concern there in Syria that after the Beirut explosion, all attention has been focused on providing aid to the Lebanese Armenian community or to Lebanon. However, Armenia, actually considering that Armenia was one of the only open consulates in Aleppo during the civil war, this could be a continuity of Armenia's presence in Syria. The other one was the Swiss embassy, the Swiss consulate in Aleppo. So I think it's a matter of genuine concern about the compatriots, Armenians living there, but at the same time, I wouldn't put past the fact that this could also be a good PR, saying that Armenia, even though has all these problems, is actually extending a helping hand to communities that have been hard hit with either COVID-19 or other man-made or natural disasters.
And I think that the Armenian consulate and also the High Commissioner's office have been very active recently, both in both countries. In fact, I think this week they reported that over 800 people have repatriated since July.
Correct. These are some of the things from my own sources and conversations. A lot of those who are repatriating or going to Armenia were people who are already planned on moving there, so like planned within the next couple of months. So this just basically expedited the situation. However, the problem still remains about transportation, but also when they arrive there, what are they going to be handling? In the case of the Syrian Armenians, it's very much those who stay there, they just don't have the means to move, regardless of what happens, unless they are, airlifted from the Aleppo airport, because still the bulk of the Armenian community in Syria is still in Aleppo.
Last week, former President Serge Sargsyan finally gave his press conference where he discussed his thoughts about the April 2016 war. There has been a lot of vitriol in Armenian media about this topic, and frankly, it's distressing to see how much partisanship is injected in a matter of such national security. Alan, what was your impression of Sargsyan's press conference, and where is this media circus around the 4-day war going?
Thank you, Ovik. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of background. In April of this year, Serge Sargsyan gave testimony to a special parliamentary committee that is conducting an investigation into the April war. Many consider this committee to be a political stick that Nikol Pashinyan's administration is using to neutralize his predecessor. So after the testimony, Sargsyan gave a briefing to the press saying that he would give a press conference as soon as the state of emergency due to the COVID situation was lifted. At the time, there was some interviews given by members of the committee, including the chair, Andrei Kocharyan, saying that the committee had not found any major issues with supplies of weapons, fuel, or food. And it seemed like this chapter was going to kind of come to a close. But with the impending report from the committee in September coming up, Sargsyan broke his silence a few weeks ago, and he gave a few short videos addressing some of the questions around the April war. And that kind of triggered a bunch of back and forth between the committee and Sargsyan's administration. Andrei Kocharyan has been the most vocal, but others from the committee have also been speaking up, as well as Artsakh's Security Council Secretary Samvel Babayan. As far as the actual press conference that happened about 2 weeks ago, I found this to be somewhat unprecedented, given the fact that Sargsyan left office a little over 2 years ago. For instance, when Levon Tepetosyan left office in 1998, he kind of disappeared from the public eye for almost 10 years. Robert Kocharyan was slightly more visible after leaving office, but he occasionally commented on major developments, but I don't recall him giving a press conference in the years that followed. Considering the fact that Sargsyan left office as a result of what appeared to be a very popular uprising, and you would imagine that he would not want to reappear in public so soon after he was quote-unquote rejected. All the major media outlets were there, and the press conference lasted about 3 hours. So I just wanted to point out some notable parts. So Sargsyan said that the Azerbaijani side was not ready for compromise and was not ready to recognize the right of self-determination of the people of Artsakh. So as a result of that, there was really only one path to avoid war, and that was unilateral concessions, which was obviously unacceptable for us. A lot of the questions from the reporters centered around the meeting between the chiefs of general staff of Armenia and Azerbaijan in Moscow on April 5th. So first of all, Sargsyan mentioned that the goal was to actually have the meeting in Tbilisi so that Khachaturov, the chief of general staff of the Armenian Armed Forces, could quickly return to Armenia in case the situation changed. But the Azerbaijani side requested that the meeting happen in Moscow with the mediation of the Russian side. Sargsyan clarified that the Armenian side went into the meeting with a maximum objective of getting back all the positions that were captured by Azerbaijan in the preceding days, but also with a minimal goal of not signing any new agreement. This meant that they would keep in force the indefinite trilateral ceasefire signed in 1994, to which NKR was an equal party. He called that out as an important achievement of the meeting. Sargsyan also talked about the possibility of not agreeing to the terms that were presented and potentially taking back the positions that remained. But he said that was out of the question because that would have meant a lot more lives lost. As for punishing Azerbaijan and taking more territory, he said that would have been reckless and could have resulted in an unpredictable escalation, possibly into a full-scale war. He also specifically said that we didn't want to kind of pound our chest and proclaim victory after the April War because that would have further provoked the Azeris. Rather, he said that we prefer to translate our victory in the battlefield into a diplomatic victory, with the agreements in Vienna and St. Petersburg aimed at adding mechanisms for investigating ceasefire violations and essentially strengthening the status quo. So speaking about the committee specifically, Sargsyan said that the parliamentary committee, has access to a confidential report filed jointly by the Ministry of Defense and the Chief of General Staff Office. So they likely already have all the information they need, but he said that he wanted to show up to answer any questions that they may have. At the press conference, he refused to answer any questions that could influence the parliamentary committee, which I think also had the goal of giving the committee a chance to kind of retreat and take back some of the things they had said and save face. At one point, when asked how many positions had been lost, because Andranik Kocharyan had mentioned that 20 positions had been lost during the war, Sargsyan said that that number was not right. It was an incorrect number. It was fewer than that. And he said that it's possible that the committee hasn't completed their investigation, which is why they don't have an accurate number. Again, sort of giving the committee a chance to backtrack.
So I have a question on the chronology of the PR events. If my memory serves me right, the number of positions lost was never publicly disclosed until Sargsyan announced his intention to hold a press conference. Only following this, and before the press conference itself, there was a large PR offensive started by the current government officials, which included Andranik Kocharyan, where they disclosed the number of positions, 21, in an interview to Azatütsun. And then after the press conference, we saw Samvel Babayan and Andranik Kocharyan again back on TV, challenging the notion that anyone who loses so many posts can be considered a victor. This is before the committee itself has to publish any of the results of its work. So how much of all of this is PR and how much is closer to reality?
I think it's clear that there's definitely a political element here. Talking about the number of positions, I think that has more effect on the public than any actual tangible.
Well, let me also come in on this issue of numbers, that the media has been singularly focused on how many outposts and how much territory we lost during the 4-day war. But Defense Minister Donoyan and Serge Sargsyan have been saying that those numbers are not the right metrics with which we should understand the outcome of the 4-day war. Whether it's 18 outposts or 19 outposts or 21 outposts, that is not the right way to measure this. Emil, can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, sure. I prepared a chronology of the war back in 2016, and since then has updated it. It's on my blog. It's also on the USC Armenian Studies. I think that there's a link there as well. In terms of metrics, it's always hard to use those sort of metrics to measure any kind of major complex event like a war. But I would say that obviously there is an effort from the side of the former government to discount the losses, to diminish the losses that occurred on the Armenian side and to kind of increase them on the Azerbaijani side. And on the part of the former opposition present government, there is an effort to kind of increase the sense of the loss in April 2016 as one of the major sort of arguments for Serge Sargsyan to go at the time and since then. Coming back to the actual war, and what was it, a win, a loss? I mean, it's very hard to clearly objectively argue that it was a win for the Armenian side, considering that positions were lost and the Armenian side wasn't able to return them. It's not just that they didn't try to return them; they tried, especially in the Talish direction. If we look at the chronology of the events, it's really 3 separate skirmishes or large skirmishes that were happening. First one in Mardakert area, near Seysolan post, where Armenians were able to very quickly return the post that was lost, where the 4 guys were killed, including recently nominated for national hero Captain Orfanyan. And that was a clear win for the Armenian side because Azerbaijani side lost considerable manpower there and lost the post that they gained very quickly. In the south, where Armenians lost the Leletepa positions on the hill, there was a very small effort to try to regain some of the positions, but overall it was definitely a loss for the Armenian side in terms of the manpower lost, in terms of the positions lost. It was a tactical loss, it was not a major loss, but still was a loss. In the Talish direction, situation was more mixed because initially Azerbaijani thrust into the Talish area, extended into the positions northwest of the village of Talish and dominated movement over the village of Talish, but overnight from April 2nd onto April 3rd, Armenian forces, a very small group of Armenian forces, actually was able to return those very strategic hills positions, specifically positions 170, 171, northwest of the village of Talish, and regain tactical dominance specifically around the village of Talish. But subsequently, on 4th of April, as Armenians tried to regain additional positions that they lost, so-called hill called 𝐀𝐸𝐶, they weren't able to return it, and Armenian forces suffered casualties, and this is when Azerbaijanis brought in the armed drones to attack the Armenian forces on the attack, were attacked by the armed drones, and that was a big surprise for the Armenians, at least most of the Armenian forces that were there. So it was a mixed picture. There was some success on the Armenian side in Talish direction, but overall I think it was in a negative. You have to look, when you're a politician, you look at it from the political perspective. It's very hard to admit defeat in the election or in the war, and when you're in the opposition, it's very hard to praise government or official conduct whenever there is even reason to praise it. So you have this political views, and then you have a objective or relatively objective picture, which was complex, but overall to the negative of the Armenian side. The Serge Sargsyan's argument that, hey, we got this position support for the confidence building or like the ceasefire monitoring measures. Come on, I mean, that's not equivalent to even tactical hill being lost. On the other hand, this opposition arguments was this was major defeat or whatever. No, it wasn't, but it was a significant blow for the Armenian side, especially for security of the village of Talish, and of course for all those families that lost loved ones. And that's another thing. Even after all of these years, I hear this Armenian media, including some of the former government media, some of the former government figures, use this figure of 100 Armenian soldiers killed, whereas there was not 100, there were 77 soldiers killed and 4 civilians killed throughout the entire war. And to this day, people feel that it's okay to round out numbers like that when it's actual people, individuals who paid dearly for security of the country.
Emil, what was the death toll from the Azerbaijani side?
From my understanding, around 100. And of course, the Armenian side claimed that there were hundreds of Azerbaijani deaths, maybe even more than 500, but there is no substantiation of that. Over many years now, 4 years, we looked into, me and other people have looked into possibility that Azerbaijan did not objectively report, because initially, of course, they only claimed 31. But it was clear that it wasn't 31. But the way they claimed 31 was they said it was 31 on April 4th, and after April 4th, they didn't add on any numbers. But in reality, they lost close to 100. Most of them were lost on April 2nd and April 4th. April 3rd was, because there was a lot of rain, there was not much fighting going on April 3rd.
So it looks like we're saying that it was not a huge loss, it was not a huge victory, but then what was it? Is it a stalemate?
I think it was closer to stalemate at the end than a win for either side, because if we look at the objectives on the Azerbaijani side, what the objective was, it was clear that they were trying to capture Talish, they were clear they were trying to capture Madagis. At least that was the minimum objective that they were trying to achieve on April 2nd. Because of the way things went around Seysulan, because of the way things went around position 170, which held out for entire day, outgunned, by a much larger force, but those two positions the resistance to those two positions stopped their advance on April 2nd. And it was clear also that Aliyev initially only gave or only okayed a very quick operation, 24-hour operation basically. And then in the morning of April 3rd already, the Azerbaijani side they said that they were ready for ceasefire. And at that point, Armenian side said, no, we're going to fight to regain the positions we lost. And of course, they regained some, but they didn't regain all of them, didn't regain most of them in a subsequent 48-hour period. And when Azerbaijanis used the drones and when they started to threaten to shell Stepanakert with heavy artillery, Armenian side threatened to shell their energy infrastructure. That sort of raised the stakes for both sides for April 5th. And actually overnight from April 4th into April 5th, Azerbaijanis did use some of the heavy artillery, but didn't fire at Stepanakert. They fired at Armenian military in the south, but weren't very accurate in their firing. So that kind of raised the stakes, and Serge Sargsyan, for many years prior to that, made it clear that he did not value the sort of this small tactical gains at the cost of Armenian lives. His position was always that we need to sort of decelerate, we need to de-escalate, and not risk additional lives on our side, because it's just there's not a tangible value that we're achieving with this. On the Azerbaijani side, there's much more of course, justification being made that we're fighting to regain the lost pride over the situation, and the government can afford to sacrifice more people. But on the Azerbaijani side, that's one thing that the Armenians don't appreciate. On the Azerbaijani side, there's great sensitivity to losses as well. It's not like that they are ready to sort of sacrifice their people. Not at all. I mean, each individual loss is a very big deal in Azerbaijan as well. Of course, there is this effort to sort of to glorify the people who were killed in the fight for their homeland, etc. But especially the type of people that they lost in this April war, basically most of the command of the special forces, which were for many years were prepared by Turkey, since then got trained by sort of the leading Turkish experts in the special forces warfare. Those guys were killed during April fighting in Talish area, and that actually created this whole other narrative in Azerbaijan that's, again, very little known in Armenia, that there was betrayal at the level of military leadership, political leadership, that those special forces went in the area that I mentioned, the post 170, 171 northwest of Talish, and they were abandoned by the military leadership, by the political leadership, and that's why they suffered all those major casualties there. And later on, there was a big case looking for Armenian traitors in the Azerbaijani military, in which at least 10 or 11 people were tortured to death, and to this day, dozens of people are in prison on treason charges, and more were, sort of went through this torture chambers, etc. One people who went through that process is actually the guy who cut Kerem Sloyan's head off in Seysulan, and later on sort of showed it on video, and that's how we know that it's him. He was actually imprisoned and tortured on alleged treason charges. Why? Because somebody under torture told on him, basically, and he managed to survive. But anyway, so it's a much more complex picture. It was not a clear win for either side. It was definitely not. It was more of a stalemated outcome with complex results for both sides.
So this week I noticed many articles about various awards being awarded to military officers and citizens. For example, April 2016 war hero Captain Rufanyan, that Emil just mentioned, will receive a posthumous Hero of Artsakh title. Arthur Vagharshak will receive a Hero of Artsakh by President of Artsakh, Harutyunyan. Captain Rupen Sanamyan will be awarded with the title of National Hero. There are 4 more servicemen back in July, posthumously as well. What is the history and background of all these awards? Why are they important? Why are they happening right now, Emil? Do you know?
Well, in any country, this process of awarding people is a process of history writing, sort of recognizing particular individuals at the expense of others, and there's always political rationale underpinning this. If we look back at the history of the Hero of Armenia, National Hero of Armenia Award, the first awards were made in 1994, shortly after the war with Azerbaijan ended. But none of the people initially awarded in 1994 had any direct role in the war. It was 𝐀𝐤𝐿 Vazgen. He was, I think, still alive at the time. It was Viktor Ambartsumyan, the astrophysicist who was an activist in the late Perestroika period, but I mean, hardly the hero, of the war. And also Alek Manukyan, a very prominent diaspora philanthropist, active in AGBU, father of Louis Simon, etc. Again, a figure of substantial importance in the Armenian diaspora, in the Armenian world, but those recognitions made by Levon Petrosyan at the time sort of made an effort to disassociate heroism from war, which is a normal appreciation. Normally, the titles of national heroes are given to heroes of the war rather than people who, make financial contributions or any cultural contributions, etc. So that was the initial start to the sort of the politics of the national heroism in Armenia. Then in 1996, shortly before his re-election run, Ter Petrosyan's re-election run, 7 people who were killed in the period from 1990 to 1993 were recognized. But again, the selection process was just atrocious. 3 people killed were not even killed in the war. 2 of them were killed during the hostage crisis with one of the paramilitary groups in Yerevan. Then there were other people who were actually killed in the war and were actual legitimate heroes of the war, like Tatul Kirpian, Monte Melkonyan. But again, they were bunched in together with this other political group that the reason they were recognized because they were associated with the then ruling party, and there was this sort of political underpinning there. And after that 1996 awards, when many much more prominent heroes of the war who were also killed in the war were not recognized, and of course even the living heroes were not recognized. Samvel Babayan, who was a very influential figure at the time in Artsakh, he introduced an award of Hero of Artsakh. This was in 1997, in that period when after Kocheren already left to become prime minister of Armenia, and Babayan sort of positioning, trying to become the leader of Nagorno-Karabakh. So he introduced the Hero of Artsakh title, and guess who got the first Hero of Artsakh title? Samvel Babayan. And since then it became a political award in Artsakh as well, where most of it went both to people who were killed in the war, but also to politicians like Robert Kocharian and Serge Sargsyan and Arkady Gukasyan, etc. So history, especially with the Armenian National Award, this is the very first time when an actual active military serviceman who is alive is recognized as a hero of Armenia. That's Ruben Sanaman, happens to be. I'm not aware of the relationship, but it's a very rare last name, so it could be. It was clearly a political, again, effort by this current administration to kind of create new narrative, create a new narrative where they're the legitimate government. They're much more generous with their awards. One thing that was discussed in a very negative kind of tones is that in addition to Ruben Sanaman, who was obviously a very accomplished serviceman and played a very key role in this fighting, but there were also about 71 individuals who received the Combat Cross Medal award, which is typically a highest award. There's a first and second degree, but the highest award for military valor in Armenia. During the entire Karabakh War, since the award was introduced in 1993, it was first introduced in Artsakh, then it became also the overall Armenian award. Only about through the entirety of the war and afterwards, when others were recognized, only about 700 people were ever given these medals. So in this fighting that only took really just 36 hours, 71 people were recognized compared to 700 people in the war that lasted for several years, in which thousands of people were killed. So that there was an argument that this devalues the award, and devalues, of course, all of this many hundreds and thousands of people who were killed in the war, and since then. So there is this back and forth happening between the veterans groups, and I think that was part of the reason why the Artsakh government felt compelled to go back and award more people from the April War as well, because this is really just not a very equivalent approach to what happened in Tavush versus what happened in April War. Obviously, it was a much greater scale of fighting in April War, and let alone compared to the Karabakh War of 1991, 1994. So there is this political narrative writing. That's what's happening.
On August 18, former Defense Minister Vagharshak Harutyunyan was appointed by Prime Minister Pashinyan as his chief advisor. There wasn't a lot of media coverage on this other than the news of the appointment itself. He has not given any interviews, but we wanted to let our listeners know more about this, as it seems to be an important post. Who is he, and what is the significance of this appointment?
Vagharshak Harutyunyan, of course, as you mentioned, he was the defense minister of Armenia for a brief period between 1999 and 2000. He was subsequently an opposition figure in Armenia. Of course, he was fired by 𝐀𝐬𝐿, so he became an opposition figure for the next couple of decades almost until now. And after initial effort to remove Yuri Khachaturov as Armenia's representative, as General Secretary of CSTO, Vagharshak Harutyunyan was the candidate for that position. Armenia's new Armenian government's candidate to replace Yuri Khachaturov, but of course, instead of agreeing that in advance, they started charges against Khachaturov and then removed them before reaching any agreement with the other parties in the CSTO. So Vagharshak Harutyunyan ended up without being general secretary. And in a way, I think this is kind of a compensation nomination for Vagharshak Harutyunyan, because I'm not really sure to what extent historically advisors to political leaders of Armenia, military advisors, have not really played major role other than sort of liaison with the military maybe. So I don't think it's a significant appointment in that sense. Vagharshak Harutyunyan is a professional officer. He's a naval officer, actually, Soviet Navy officer. He was, he's I think one of the serious Armenian military experts in general. It's not a very big group. He obviously well versed in Soviet military politics, you could say. He was Armenia's representative to Russia, military representative to Russia through most of the war, Karabakh War in the early 90s. So he might be a good candidate also as kind of liaison with Russia. So that's about it.
Emil, I believe you generally have a good opinion of Vagharshak Harutyunyan, but I wanted to address some potential blemishes on his career. First, he was one of the individuals, along with Androni Kocharian, who was mentioned in an ultimatum to Robert Kocharian right after the October 27 terrorist events, demanding that the latter make certain political appointments. But more importantly to me, while still holding the position of defense minister, Vagharshak Harutyunyan was involved in an attempt to get Moscow's support to unseat Kocharian, Robert Kocharian. This was the reason why he was fired and demoted in rank, wasn't it?
I think your understanding is generally correct. Vagharshak Harutyunyan, like I said, he was not a major political figure in Armenia. The reason he became defense minister, I think Vazgen Sargsyan just wanted to remain the defense minister as he was prime minister, so he brought in somebody who had no major political influence in Armenia or in the military, brought somebody from outside to lead the defense ministry. So Vagharshak Harutyunyan's role in that period in 1999-2000 was fairly minor. After Vazgen Sargsyan was killed, he basically Vagharshak Harutyunyan remained subordinate to Vazgen Sargsyan's deputy, Vahan Sherkhanyan. When Vahan Sherkhanyan outlined those demands to Kocharian, which could be interpreted as a putsch attempt, because most of these people were military people who were former sort of people of Vazgen Sargsyan, who were acting, I think, in this environment of uncertainty of who was behind the attack on the parliament, and I think there was this a genuine suspicion initially, and later on less genuine but more political suspicion of Robert Kocharian, because things kind of got cleared up as far as who were the attackers and who was behind them, who might have been behind them, and there wasn't anybody behind them. Basically, they were acting on their own. Then at the time, he ended up on that list, and at the time he was sort of the guy who took Aram Sargsyan, Vazgen's brother, to meet with Russian officials to try to sort of create this animus towards Kocharian, who was being portrayed as this American pro-Western, politician at the time by his opposition. So, but none of that worked out because Kocharian and Putin were able to sort of maintain good relationship at the time. Kocharian recently in one of his interviews sort of said that maybe I should have prosecuted them for basically treason and basically a putsch, and I didn't. I think that's a good thing that they weren't, because bottom line is there's always a lot of miscommunication happening in this sort of situation, and this particular crisis was of course unprecedented for Armenia, for some group of people to walk into parliament and just start shooting people and shooting a leader of our a major figure as Vazgen Sargsyan. So that kind of reaction I thought was if not justified but understandable. from their side. Later on, this sort of grievances mounted between that camp, Vagharshakyan's camp, and within Vagharshakyan's camp, because Vagharshakyan sort of parted ways with Vagharshak and others, Aram Sargsyan, etc. I think Aram Sargsyan actually came out of this situation, brother of Vazgen Sargsyan, better learned about it. And what is interesting about this whole situation is that the reason the new government has shied away from sort of attacking Kocharian on October 27 issue is because Aram Sargsyan is sort of convinced that Kocharian had nothing to do with it, and he was, Aram Sargsyan, I guess he had access to the investigation because it was led by people who were close to Vazgen Sargsyan's family. It's a very tragic page in the Armenian history, October 27, and it sort of developed this long-term animus between different figures that were allied with Vazgen Sargsyan previously, on one side Kocharian, on the other side Shirkhanyan and the other people. And they still haven't really reconciled. I'm not sure if they ever reconciled. They're old men now. I would, of course, keep that in mind, that Vagharshak, Harutyunyan has this baggage, but I would primarily consider him a military, or let's say a Russia-Armenia military cooperation expert.
Okay, with this, I think we need to close today's weekend review. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our program for this week's Groong Weekend Review. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues you'd like to hear us cover. Contact us on our website at groong.org, that's Groong, or on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐀𝐬𝐿𝐿, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.